You can have the building. You cannot have what the building never owned. As wildfire smoke swallowed the street, 8 scarred bikers sat inside, while 31 waited beyond the glass, and one empty chair faced the man demanding Walter's signature. Then Kiln touched the loosened brass plate beneath chair 40. "Sign here, Mr. Brannock, before the South Road closes," Dorian said, shoving the contract forward hard enough to knock a glass bottle from the counter. It shattered beside Walter's shoe. Walter's breath caught. The pen trembled. The evacuation siren began its second cycle at 6:18 p.m. An orange light pulsed through the front window while Dorian pressed one finger against the signature line. "You keep the final payment," he said. "We take the building exactly as listed." The paper smelled of fresh toner. The room smelled of bay rum, hot metal, old leather, and bitter smoke leaking under the door. Walter looked past the contract toward the pale blue Coken chair at the far end of the shop. A white inventory tag hung from its chrome arm. Another marked the mirror. A third circled the cabinet where his father's razors had rested for 43 years. 2 removal workers waited beside a box truck, blurred by drifting ash. Dorian turned the page. "Fixtures, furnishings, mounted equipment, trade objects," he read. Walter swallowed. "That chair isn't yours." Dorian checked his watch. 6:19. "Then prove it." Walter's left hand tightened around the pen. His right palm rested on the counter where customers had once left coins, wedding rings, and folded job notices. None of that appeared on the document. None of it mattered to Dorian. The company had agreed to purchase the brick shell, the pipes, and the parcel beneath it, but the typed inventory reached far beyond the sale, terms Walter had approved. The siren stopped. Silence hit harder. Outside, the box truck idled while a red evacuation notice slapped against the glass. "The Western Ridge is 12 miles out," Dorian said. "The wind may turn by 9. I am offering transportation and the remaining $26,400 tonight." Walter glanced at the clock above the mirror. "And if I don't sign?" "The escrow authorization expires at midnight. If you sign this asset schedule, anything left inside transfers with the building." Walter stared at the chair again. Its vinyl had faded from sea green to winter glass. A small brass plate beneath the footrest carried one number, 40. Dorian slid the contract closer. "One signature. Then you walk out safely." Walter lowered the pen until its tip hovered above the line. Metal scraped behind the shop. One worker was dragging a loading ramp toward the rear door. The latch rattled. "They are not authorized to enter yet," Walter said. "They are preparing," Dorian replied. "So should you." The first engine arrived like distant thunder. Then another answered. Then 5 more. The counter glass vibrated beneath Walter's hand. Dorian turned as headlights appeared through the smoke at the far end of Alder Street. 10 became 20. 20 became 39. The motorcycles advanced in 2 disciplined columns, black tires cutting through ash, scarred riders bent behind windshields, leather jackets dusted gray. They stopped without blocking the road. No one revved. No one shouted. At 6:21 p.m., 39 men removed their helmets almost together. Walter's pen slipped from his fingers and landed across the ensign line. Dorian whispered, "Who are they?" Walter looked at the empty chair marked 40 and felt a promise, buried for 28 years. Move through the room before the first biker reached the door. The first man through the door was Virgil Kiln Maddox, 61, broad across the shoulders, with a pale scar running from his right temple to the edge of his jaw. Ash clung to his black leather jacket. His boots left gray prints across Walter's spotless white tile. He stopped 3 feet inside, removed his gloves, and placed them on the chrome coat rack as carefully as a church hat. "Evening, Walter." Behind him, 38 men waited beneath the orange sky. Their jackets were cracked, their faces weathered, their hands stained with grease and road dust. Yet none crossed the threshold until Kiln looked back and gave one small nod. Then they entered in a single line. Dorian stepped away from the counter. "This property is under an evacuation order." Kiln studied the unsigned contract, the inventory tags, and the broken bottle glittering near Walter's shoe. He said nothing. One by one, all 39 bikers crossed the threshold, remove their helmets, and let Walter count every face. Kiln then directed 31 of them back beneath the awning and into the vacant storefront next door. 8 remained inside, while the others waited behind the glass and returned one at a time when Walter called their names. The narrow shop had room to breathe again, but the street outside had become a wall of leather, ash, and silent witnesses. The contrast made Dorian's navy suit look almost delicate. At 6:23 p.m., the evacuation notice struck the front glass again. A draft carried in the taste of pine smoke and hot dust. Walter coughed into his sleeve. Kiln immediately closed the door. "You cannot interfere with a scheduled closing," Dorian said. "No one is blocking anything," Kiln replied. The path from the counter to the entrance remained open. 2 bikers even stepped aside to widen it. Dorian glanced toward his workers outside, but neither man approached the shop. 39 motorcycles stood along the curb in exact formation, their cooling engines ticking beneath the falling ash. "Then state your business," Dorian said. Kiln turned toward Walter. "Shop still open?" Walter looked at him as though the question belonged to another decade. "There's a wildfire moving toward town. I heard. The South Road may close." "I heard that too." Kiln removed a folded paper from inside his jacket and set on the counter. It was a Barber appointment card, yellow at the edges, stamped August 28, 1996. The time written in blue ink was 5:40 a.m. A second biker placed another card beside it, then a third. Soon the polished counter held 39 cards in 4 straight rows. Every card carried Walter's handwriting. Every card bore the same date. The times advanced in 10-minute intervals. Dorian leaned closer. "What is this supposed to prove?" "Nothing yet," Kiln said. Walter picked up the first card. The paper smelled faintly of tobacco, machine oil, and the cedar drawer where it had been kept for 28 years. He recognized the name immediately. Virgil Maddox. No nickname then. No Iscar. Just a 23-year-old mill worker who had arrived before sunrise wearing a borrowed shirt. Walter's eyes moved across the rows. Men he had known thin, frightened, and ashamed now stood around him with silver hair, heavy rings, and old injuries written across their faces. He looked toward the pale blue chair marked 40. It remained untouched. "Where is Abel?" Walter asked, though the answer had lived inside him for 9 years. The shop became still. Even Dorian stopped turning pages. Kiln looked at the empty chair, then back at Walter. "That's why nobody sits there." Walter's fingers tightened around the appointment card. Outside, one of Dorian's workers dragged the loading ramp another foot toward the rear entrance. Metal scraped concrete. 3 bikers turned their heads at once. Kiln raised one hand, and they faced forward again. No threat, no movement, only restraint. Dorian gathered the contract. "This gathering changes nothing. I will return before 10 with a revised asset schedule and written closing instructions." He pointed at the chair. "That item stays with the building unless ownership is established." Kiln's expression did not change. "Bring whatever paper helps you sleep." Dorian paused at the door. "And what exactly do you intend to do until then?" Kiln pulled a worn wallet from his jacket and laid $32 beside the oldest appointment card. "Get a haircut." Inside the shop and beyond the glass, the other 38 men raised their wallets in answer. Walter looked at the clean mirrors, the white towels, the dark leather jackets, and the ash settling over every shoulder. At 6:27 p.m., he reached beneath the counter, lifted his scissors, and turned the sign on the door from closed to open. Walter snapped a white cape around Kiln's neck at 6:31 p.m. Black leather disappeared beneath clean cotton. Gray ash settled on the biker's scarred knuckles while Walter lifted a silver comb from blue disinfectant that smelled sharp enough to cut through the smoke. "Same as 1996? Walter asked. "Leave more on top this time." 3 men smiled. Nobody laughed. The scissors began their measured work beneath fluorescent lights that made every chrome edge shine. Behind Walter, the 7 bikers still inside divided the work. 2 wrapped the wall mirrors in fire blankets. 2 carried sealed boxes from the back room. 1 cleaned soot from the ventilation grate, while the last two moved packed items to the doorway for the men outside. Each movement was deliberate. Each object was returned to Walter before being packed. No drawer opened without permission. The shop looked stranger by the minute. The mint walls and porcelain sinks held only 8 bikers at a time, while the rest formed a dark line beyond the glass. Tattooed forearms folded pristine towels. Heavy boots crossed how Walter had polished that morning. Outside, ash drifted over 39 motorcycles like dirty snow, but inside, the razors remained aligned by size, the combs soaked in blue solution, and the old cash register waited beneath a lace-edged dust cover Walter's wife had sewn in 1988. At 6:42, Kiln stood, and Walter rang the $32 already waiting on the counter into the register. Exact price. No tip. Walter frowned. You rode through an evacuation zone, and you're counting change. We came as customers. Only 3 men had requested full haircuts. The others had booked 4-minute cleanups at the neck and temples, the same practical trim Walter had once given them before job interviews. The next biker sat down. His name was Calvin Tread Monroe, though Walter remembered him as a thin 20-year-old with a split lip and 1 clean shirt. Calvin paid $32. So did the next man, and the next. Soon the register drawer held neat stacks of bills, while the floor gathered dark hair mixed with pale ash. Nobody offered charity. Nobody called Walter helpless. They let him work. At 7:08, a second evacuation alert flashed across Kiln's phone before the signal vanished. The fire remained west of the ridge, but the county had reduced the southern route to escorted traffic only. Walter saw the message reflected in the mirror. You should leave. Kiln remained in the waiting chair. After the last appointment. That carries us past 10. Then we keep the line moving. Walter set down the clippers. Abel would not ask 39 men to remain in town while the evacuation road narrowed. The room slowed. A biker stopped folding towels. Another lowered a box of framed photographs. Kiln looked at Walter through the mirror, his expression flat but not cold. We're not staying for the building. Walter turned. Then what are you staying for? Kiln glanced toward the pale blue chair at the far end of the shop. It remained untouched beneath the orange glow leaking through the blinds. For the part you never understood. Walter's jaw tightened. He returned to the haircut, but his hands had lost their rhythm. The scissors clicked twice, then stopped. The broken rhythm drew every eye in the room. At 7:19, Nolan Pike, a retired equipment claims examiner, removed the brass wall clock and wrapped it in a wool blanket. Another found Walter's licensing certificate behind the coat rack and slid it into a waterproof sleeve. 2 men shut off the gas valve beneath the towel warmer and marked the line for license removal. None of them spoke above a murmur. Their restraint made the distant sirens seem louder. Walter finished the 6th haircut and swept the floor into a narrow black line. He passed chair 40 on his way to the dustpan. Something caught his eye. The brass plate beneath the footrest sat crooked. It had always been level. Walter knelt despite the pain in his knees and touched the lower screw. It turned beneath 1 finger. Fresh scratches marked the metal around it. He looked toward the rear door, then at the box truck outside, then back at Kiln. Someone loosened this. Kiln rose slowly. The 7 men inside stopped moving. Beyond the glass, the others did the same. Walter pressed the plate flat and heard a faint sound inside the chair's base. Paper shifted behind the brass. Something had been hidden there for 28 years. Walter reached for a screwdriver, but Kiln placed 2 fingers over the brass plate. Not yet. The words were quiet. The effect was not. 7 men stood beneath the sterile lights while 31 ash-covered figures watched through the front glass. Between them, the pale blue chair gleamed like the only clean piece of sky left in Briarfield. Walter straightened slowly. You knew something was inside. Kiln met his eyes in the mirror. Abel knew. At 7:23 p.m., the 7th biker lowered himself into Walter's main chair. His name was Orson Hollis, 64, with a burn patch along his neck and a steel brace beneath 1 trouser leg. Walter draped him in a white cape. The cloth covered the scars, the leather, and the heavy belt buckle. For 20 minutes, Orson looked like any ordinary customer receiving a trim. "You remember the mill closing?" he asked. Walter lifted his comb. "Everybody remembers. On August 24th, 1996, Briarfield Timber Works had locked its gates without warning. 412 workers lost their jobs before noon. 40 of them had been young men from the night shift. Kiln had been 23. Orson had been 36 and 3 months behind on his mortgage. Abel Larkin had walked out carrying a dented lunchbox and a list of every man who had no working telephone. Walter said nothing. His scissors moved 3 times, then stopped once. Orson watched him in the mirror. "First interview I got, I almost skipped it." "Your hair looked like a bird's nest," Walter said. "My shirt smelled worse." 3 bikers near the towel cabinet nodded. One smiled at the floor. Orson continued. Walter had opened the shop at 4:50 each morning before regular customers arrived. He cut their hair without charging. He shaved the men who had sold their razors. He let them use the shop telephone and gave every employer the same callback number. The number still appeared in gold paint across the front window, half hidden now beneath an evacuation notice. "You made us sign a schedule," Nolan Pike said. "Abel made you sign it," Walter corrected. He said 40 desperate men could ruin one generous man if they arrived all at once. The room softened. Outside, smoke turned the streetlights brown. Inside, white towels passed through blackened hands and chrome tools shone beneath fluorescent tubes. Beyond the glass, the others listened as stories of borrowed collars and nervous interviews traveled through the open doorway. Walter finished Orson's haircut. Orson paid $32 and moved aside. The next man sat. His name was Bram Sloan. He had once received 3 rejection calls through Walter's shop before a road crew hired him in Idaho. The man after him, Miles Carden, had used the back room to change into Walter's late brother's gray interview jacket. Another had slept 2 nights in his truck, but arrived each morning freshly shaved because Walter left the rear washroom unlocked. "You never told me half of this," Walter said. Kiln sat beneath the wall clock, arms folded. "You never asked what happened after." The men had found work gradually. 1 became a welder. 3 joined highway crews. 6 moved into heavy equipment repair. Others drove freight, installed power lines, or worked seasonal fire roads. They scattered across Oregon, Nevada, Idaho, and Montana, but Abel kept the appointment cards. Every August 28th, Abel kept calling until every surviving member had answered and renewed the same promise. At 8:04 p.m., Walter completed the 12th haircut. The air now carried bay rum, clipped hair, hot smoke, and the metallic scent of tools being packed into waterproof cases. He looked at Chair 40 again. The chair arrived that winter. Kiln nodded. December 17th. No return address. That was Abel's idea. Walter crossed the white tile and knelt beside the crooked brass plate. Who paid for it? Every face inside and beyond the glass turned toward him. Calvin Monroe answered first. Every man gave part of his first paycheck. Kiln stepped forward and crouched beside Walter. With a coin, he loosened the upper screw, then the lower one. The plate marked 40 came free in his hand. Behind it waited a narrow cavity and a waxed paper envelope, yellowed at the corners but dry. Walter reached inside. His fingertips brushed the paper. Before he could pull it free, the rear door handle turned from outside. Once, twice, then a steel cable tightened around the base of Chair 40. The cable snapped tight, and Chair 40 lurched 3 inches across the spotless tile. Chrome screamed against porcelain. Walter lost his balance. Kiln caught him before his knees struck the floor. The 7 bikers inside moved instinctively, but Kiln stopped them with one raised hand. "Nobody touches that door." The cable pulled again. The chair twisted toward the rear entrance, dragging a dark crescent through the pale dust. Outside, one of Dorian's workers leaned over a powered winch beside the box truck. A printed work order clipped to his board already marked Chair 40 as cleared for removal. When the rear door opened, he saw 8 bikers inside and dozens more visible through the front glass. Kiln called through the doorway, stopped the winch. The worker killed the power and stepped away from the controls. Calvin photographed the cable, the drag mark, the inventory tag, and the work order. Its approval timestamp read 5:54 p.m. before Walter had been shown the final asset schedule. Orson checked the time. 8:07 p.m. No one crossed the threshold. No one raised a fist. The cables slackened across the tile. Kiln crouched beside Walter. "You hurt." "Only my pride." Walter's white barber coat was smeared with ash where Kiln's sleeve had caught him, against the shop's mint walls and polished mirrors. The black mark looked almost deliberate, as if the outside world had finally entered the one room Walter had kept orderly for 50 years. Calvin retrieved a compact cable cutter from his motorcycle tool roll. At Kiln's direction, he severed the line and laid both ends on the counter. The unsigned contract, the appointment cards, and the severed cable now shared the counter. Behind the brass plate waited the one document none of them had seen. Walter reached into the chair's base and withdrew the waxed envelope. It was narrow, stiff, and warm from the metal. The smell of cedar and machine oil rose when he opened it. Inside lay a folded receipt from December 17th, 1996. The paper named the model, the serial number, and the purchase price, $1,842.40. Attached to it was a signed gift declaration, purchased by the Briarfield 40 and irrevocably given to Walter Brannock for use in his trade. 40 signatures followed in blue and black ink. Virgil Maddox, Orson Hollis, Calvin Monroe, Nolan Pike, 36 more. The final name was Abel Larkin. Walter sat on the floor with the receipt in both hands. The fluorescent lights reflected across the chrome base. Around Walter, 7 men stood in silence while the others watched through the glass. Every one of them had signed the same clean white page nearly 3 decades earlier. "You bought it," Walter said. "All of you." Kiln nodded. "From our first paychecks." Walter unfolded the second sheet. Abel's handwriting slanted hard to the right, the same way it had on every appointment card. It contained no legal language, no request for money, just 3 lines. "When Walter cuts the final head, every man still Abel returns. Walter closes the door himself. If one of us cannot come, chair 40 keeps his place." Walter read it twice, then once more. The shop became silent except for the faint ticking of the wrapped wall clock and the distant pulse of evacuation sirens. "He knew I'd close someday," Walter said. "He knew somebody might try to decide how," Kiln replied. Walter looked toward the street, where the orange sky had deepened to rust. "Abel has been gone 9 years. The promise hasn't." Walter folded the note along its original crease. His thumb paused over Abel's signature. "Then you have 39 men risking the South Road for a chair and an old barber." "No," Kiln's voice stayed level. "We have 39 men making sure you choose." Walter looked at the contract. The payment would cover his remaining mortgage, his medical bills, and 6 months of rent. If he refused, Dorian could delay everything. If he signed, the building and every tagged object might vanish before morning. Every practical consideration told Walter to surrender, but Abel's note reminded him that convenience was not the same as consent. Walter stood with Kiln's help and placed the receipt beneath the glass counter, safe from ash and careless hands. "I'll sign," he said. Several men shifted. Kiln did not. After Dorian removes the chair from the inventory, Walter continued. "And after every man here gets the haircut he paid for." At 8:12 p.m., Kiln gave one nod. Then Nolan's phone lit with a weak signal. A message from the county alert system appeared for 6 seconds before vanishing. "Wind shift expected at 9 o'clock. Western access closed. Final escorted southbound convoy scheduled for 11:15. Walter read it over Nolan's shoulder. "That gives us just over 3 hours." Kiln looked through the glass at the 27 men still waiting for their turns, then at the untouched chair. "Enough time to keep one promise," he said. From outside came the slam of a truck door. Dorian's headlights turned onto Alder Street. Dorian stepped from the sedan at 8:16 p.m. with a leather folder under one arm and 2 removal workers behind him. Their reflective vests burned bright orange beneath the smoke-dark sky. Inside, 8 men in ash-streaked leather stood among white towels and chrome basins, while 31 more waited beyond the glass. Walter made 3 quick passes with the clippers, then paused when Dorian entered. "Do not stop for him," Kiln said. Dorian opened the front door and froze at the sight of the severed steel cable on the counter. Beside it lay photographs, the original receipt, and the unsigned agreement. "My crew was securing company property," he said. "Your crew attached a winch before I signed anything," Walter replied. Dorian looked at the pale blue chair. Fresh drag marks crossed the white tile beneath it. The evidence was ugly against the spotless floor. One black crescent, one clean lie exposed. "That chair is listed as a fixture," Dorian said. Kiln remained beside the wall, arms lowered, hands visible. "Then show us the section." Dorian removed a revised document from his folder. Nolan photographed every page before it touched the counter. Calvin photographed the time on the wall clock. Orson recorded the serial number beneath the chair and matched it to the 1996 receipt. No one surrounded Dorian. No one blocked the exit. The bikers simply kept making a record. Dorian's voice sharpened. "You are creating an intimidating environment." Kiln looked toward the clear path between the counter and the door. "Walk out whenever you choose." Silence held for 3 seconds. Dorian glanced toward the open door, but remained where he was. Walter finished the 16th haircut at 8:24 p.m. He brushed gray clippings from the cape, accepted $32, and called the next man forward. Behind him, Bram Sloan opened an old metal file cabinet Walter had authorized him to pack. The drawer released a dry smell of paper, dust, and hair tonic. Inside were tax receipts, equipment warranties, licenses, the acquisition packet from when Walter bought the building, and the current sale file. Bram carried the packet to the counter with both hands. "Walter, look at this." The addendum was 6 pages deep, folded behind an inspection report. Paragraph 14 excluded barbering equipment, trade tools, customer records, and any furnishings purchased by the seller or a third party. Walter read it once. Kiln read it twice. Dorian reached for the page. Nolan slid a clean towel beneath it instead. "Let me finish photographing the page before anyone moves it," Nolan said. The white towel made the yellowed paper look older and more honest. Dorian adjusted his cuff. "That clause applies only if ownership can be established." Walter placed the chair receipt beside the addendum. "Model, date, serial number, 40 signatures. Established enough?" Dorian did not answer. Ash crossed the windows in dry waves while Walter continued cutting. Around Dorian, every packed box, photograph page, and uncovered serial number made the shop feel less like a room he controlled and more like a record he could not alter. At 8:31 p.m., another county alert reached Calvin's phone. Southbound traffic reduced to 1 escorted lane. Final civilian convoy remained scheduled for 11:15 p.m. Walter saw the message and set down his comb. "Here are my terms. Remove every tool, chair, photograph, and record that does not belong to the building. Confirm transportation under the original agreement. Then I will sign." Dorian closed the folder. "The final payment is conditional on immediate cooperation." "So, is my signature?" Kiln glanced at Walter, but said nothing. This decision had to remain Walter's. Dorian studied the 8 bikers inside, then the 31 figures visible beyond the glass. One mirror remained uncovered. The exit was clear, and every document had been photographed. He gave a thin nod. "I'll revise the schedule." "Here," Walter said. "In front of us." Dorian turned toward the door. "I need the mobile printer." At 8:37 p.m., he returned to his sedan. The bikers resumed packing. 3 men lifted boxed razors. 1 man wrapped the framed license. Walter called the 17th customer. 12 minutes later, Dorian came back carrying warm pages that smelled of toner and heated plastic. He placed them on the counter with a silver pen. The equipment list appeared corrected. The mirrors were excluded. The tools were excluded. The customer files were excluded. Kiln read every line without touching the paper. Walter reached the final page. Under Heritage Display Fixtures, 1 item remained in smaller type. Pale blue hydraulic barber chair. Rear station permanently affixed. Walter looked across the room. Chair 40 stood alone beneath the fluorescent lights. the brass plate missing and the waxed envelope resting safely beneath the glass. Dorian had changed the language. He had not changed the plan. Dorian tapped the small print with his silver pen. Permanently affixed, he said. Walter examined the cast-iron base of Chair 40. It had 4 empty mounting holes, but no anchors, wiring, or plumbing connected it to the building. Nolan photographed each hole and the uninterrupted tile beneath it. Kiln said nothing. At 8:51 p.m., the 19th haircut ended, and Walter swept another dark ribbon of hair across the white tile. The shop had become almost bare. Wrapped mirrors leaned against mint-green walls. Cardboard boxes replaced the old product shelves. 8 leather jackets darkened the waiting area, while 31 more figures lined the awning and vacant storefront beyond the glass. Blue disinfectant glowed beneath the fluorescent lights like something preserved from a cleaner world. Dorian stood in the center of that contrast, his navy suit untouched by ash, his shoes polished, his revised document already curling from the heat. "The chair is part of the rear station," he said. "The station transfers with the building." Nolan Pike pointed toward the floor. "No plumbing, no wiring, no unforgettable woods. It has remained in the same position for decades." "So has the coat rack," Calvin Monroe said. Dorian's mouth tightened. "I am not debating property law with a motorcycle club." Kiln finally moved. He walked to the front door, opened it fully, and secured it with a brass stop. Then Kiln asked the 7 men inside to sit along the walls with their hands visible. Beyond the front glass, the remaining 31 waited beneath the awning and inside the vacant storefront next door. A straight, unobstructed passage remained between Dorian and the street. Chair 40 remained alone beneath the middle light. Empty, pale blue, silent. Dorian looked around at the scarred faces repeated across the uncovered mirror nearest the counter. "This is intimidation." "Then leave," Kiln said. Dorian did not. Outside, the evacuation siren began again. 3 rising tones. 1 long hold. Ash pressed against the open doorway and scattered across the threshold, but none reached the chair. Walter stood behind the counter with Abel's note beside his scissors. "Read the clause aloud," Kiln said. "I do not take instructions from you." "Then read it for Walter." Dorian glanced down. "Heritage display fixtures permanently affixed to the premises." "Now read the exclusion," Kiln said. Dorian remained silent. Bram Sloan lifted the 6-page addendum from the white towel. His voice was rough but steady. "Trade equipment, furnishings purchased by the seller or third parties, and movable professional apparatus remain excluded from conveyance." 8 men listened inside, while 31 watched through the glass. Nobody interrupted. Dorian closed the folder. "The company has classified the chair as a display fixture." Walter stepped around the counter. "Without asking me. The designation reflects its historical value." "To whom?" "To the redevelopment project." Walter looked at the inventory tag hanging from the chair's arm. A printed rendering showed the future shopping hall, glass storefronts, artificial brick, brass lighting, and a stage barbershop corner where Chair 40 would sit behind velvet rope. "No Walter, no Abel, no 40 signatures. Just a plaque with a company logo." Dorian pushed the pen toward him. "Sign, and your payment clears tonight." The room held its breath. Walter pictured the mortgage notice on his kitchen table, the prescription bottles above his sink, the road south narrowing beneath the approaching smoke. 3 reasons to lower his head. 1 empty chair, asking him not to. "No," Walter said. Dorian blinked. "The payment deadline is midnight. Then you should correct the paper before midnight. You may lose $26,400. Walter slid the pen back. "I have lost more than money before." Dorian turned toward Kiln. "You brought these men here to pressure an elderly owner into refusing a lawful transaction." Kiln did not rise. "Walter, do you want us to leave?" Every biker looked at the old barber. The choice was placed entirely in his hands. Walter looked down the open path to the door, then at Chair 40. "No," he said. "I want them to finish their appointments." Kiln nodded once. Dorian's accusation collapsed in the silence that followed. At 8:58 p.m., Kiln stood and carried the 1996 receipt to the counter. He placed it beside Dorian's inventory sheet. The serial number beneath the chair read K. 96-184240. The receipt read K. 96-184240. The serial numbers matched exactly. The chair had never belonged to the real estate being sold. Kiln rested one finger between the two numbers. "Now," he said, "tell Walter why your crew tried to take it before he signed." Dorian looked at the matching serial numbers and did not answer. Kiln waited. The other 38 men waited with him, inside and beyond the glass. The silence lasted long enough for the evacuation siren to complete 3 rising notes and 1 sustained warning. "My crew acted on the inventory provided," Dorian said at last. "Before Walter approved it?" Kiln asked. "The transfer was expected." "Expected is not signed." Nolan placed his phone on the white countercloth. The screen showed the rear worker attaching the cable. At 8:06 p.m., Calvin added the image of the chair moving across the tile, and the work order approved at 5:54. Orson placed the county alert beside them to establish the time. Together, the images formed an uninterrupted record. Dorian glanced toward the open door, but the path remained clear. No biker stood between him and the street. They sat with their hands visible while the nearly emptied shop exposed every movement and every word. Their stillness made Dorian's polished movements look restless. He straightened the inventory pages. No property was removed. "Because we stopped the winch," Nolan said. Kiln lifted one hand. Nolan fell silent. The restraint mattered more than the accusation. Walter stepped behind his main chair and called the 20th customer. "Sit down, Miles." Dorian stared. "You are continuing appointments during an active evacuation dispute." Walter fastened a clean cape around Miles Carden's neck. "I am operating my shop." Walter combed Miles's hair into place and made the first clean cut. Hair began falling across the white cloth while the argument remained on the counter. Dorian lowered his voice. "Mr. Brannock, these men will leave. The company will remain. Think carefully about who controls your payment tomorrow." Walter watched himself in the mirror. Behind his reflection stood Kiln and Abel's empty chair. Through the front glass, the other bikers remained visible in the smoke. "That is exactly what I am doing." Dorian opened his folder again. "The payment authorization expires at midnight." Kiln placed the original receipt beside the addendum. Then the photographs. Then the severed cable. For pieces of evidence occupied less space than one folded towel. "Your company can still buy the building," he said. "Nobody here is challenging that." Dorian said nothing. "You can still receive Walter's signature," Kiln continued. "Nobody is stopping that either." "Then what do you want?" "An accurate list." Kiln tapped the receipt. The receipt identifies the 40 buyers, and the signed gift declaration transfers the chair permanently to Walter. He tapped the addendum. "Seller-owned and third-party furnishings are excluded." He tapped the photographs. "Your crew attempted removal before consent." Finally, he touched the cable. 8 men witnessed the chair move from inside. The others documented the worker, the winch, and the cable from the storefront and rear alley. And every image carries a timestamp. The wall clock read 9:07 p.m. Smoke had reduced the street outside to a narrow orange corridor. Inside, fluorescent light washed every face without mercy. Dorian's expression appeared in the one mirror they had deliberately left uncovered. There was nowhere for a small lie to hide. "You think this is leverage?" he asked. "No," Kiln replied. "It is a record." The distinction landed harder than a threat. Dorian could challenge angry men. He could call security. He could describe raised voices as intimidation. But no one had raised a voice. No one had touched him. Every doorway remained open, and every page had been copied before he entered. Nolan photographed the exclusion schedule, the gift declaration, the matching serial number, the work order, and the severed cable. As a retired equipment claims examiner, he knew exactly what the closing officer needed. He forwarded the complete record to the escrow contact named in Dorian's own packet. 30 seconds later, the reply appeared on his screen. Funds cannot be released while disputed personal property remains on the asset schedule. Dorian now had only 2 choices: remove the chair and complete the purchase, or preserve the claim and lose the transaction at midnight. Walter finished Miles's haircut and removed the cape. $32 entered the register. Excitement. No speech. Dorian looked at the remaining 19 customers, then at chair 40. Remove the heritage designation and print a clean schedule, he told the worker. The man hesitated. Now. The worker deleted the line, printed the corrected schedule, and sent it to escrow while everyone watched. Dorian initialed every page and signed a separate acknowledgement that the chair and all professional equipment belonged to Walter or third parties. He also confirmed transportation under the original agreement. At 9:16 p.m., the escrow officer confirmed receipt and authorized the payment release. Kiln read every word. Walter read them again. At 9:18 p.m., Walter signed the building transfer. The room did not cheer. Dorian gathered his folder. Kiln slid the corrected copy beneath the glass counter. You can have the building, he said. You cannot have what the building never owned. Dorian walked out through the open door. No one followed. Walter turned to the waiting men and lifted his scissors. Next, Kiln remained standing beside chair 40. Outside, escorted evacuation traffic continued moving south through the smoke. Inside, 19 appointments and one promise were still unfinished. Walter finished the 39th haircut at 10:41 p.m. The last customer rose, folded his white cape, and placed $32 beside the register. 39 receipts sat beneath the glass. 39 heads had been cut. 39 men had returned. Chair 40 remained empty beneath the final fluorescent light. Outside, the evacuation convoy crawled south through smoke and red warning lamps. Inside, the shop had been stripped to its clean bones. The mirrors were wrapped. The razors were boxed. The mint walls showed pale rectangles where photographs had hung for decades. The corrected acknowledgement, the gift declaration, the severed cable, and Abel's note remained beneath the glass, the complete record of what had happened. Walter looked at Kiln. You were supposed to be last. Abel was. Kiln carried the brass plate back to the pale blue chair and tightened it beneath the footrest. The number 40 caught the light. No one sat down. No one needed to. Walter finally understood that the empty chair was not waiting for a replacement. It was the place the group had preserved for the man who had created the promise and could no longer return to keep it himself. The other 39 had carried his share for 9 years. Walter removed his barber coat. The fabric smelled of bay rum, smoke, warm metal, and a full day's work. He folded it once, then twice, and placed it on chair 40. That counts as the final head, he said. Kiln shook his head. The promise said you close the door yourself. The 2 removal workers had remained beside the truck under the corrected transport order. Kiln lifted Walter's folded coat from chair 40 and returned it to him. Under the corrected transport agreement, Dorian's workers rolled the chair through the rear entrance and secured it beside the box tools in the waiting truck. Walter inspected every strap, closed the rear door himself, and placed the final key in his pocket. Walter looked toward the entrance. For hours, Dorian had tried to turn urgency into surrender. The bikers had broken him without threats, without blocked exits, and without a single raised hand. They had left him only facts, a serial number, an exclusion clause, photographs, witnesses, and the silence in which every weak excuse became visible. Walter crossed the bare tile, while 7 bikers formed 2 short lines behind him. The other 32 waited beneath the ash-dark awning outside. Black leather framed the white walls, but the center aisle remained empty. The men looked formidable without becoming a barricade. Walter turned the sign from open to closed at 10:47 p.m. Then he stepped outside, pulled the door shut, and locked it with his own key. Nobody carried him. Nobody hurried him. Nobody decided the ending for him. 39 engines started only after Walter placed the key in his pocket. 4 months later, Chair 40 stood inside Briarfield Abandoned Fire Station, now converted into a small adult barbering classroom. The vinyl remained faded. The scrape from Dorian's cable remained visible on the chrome base. Walter refused to polish it away. Beneath the brass number, the bikers had added a second plate. He left a seat. They kept the promise. Every Tuesday, Walter taught 6 adults who were rebuilding their lives after layoffs, debt, divorce, or years away from steady work. He taught them how to hold scissors, how to sharpen a razor, and how to let a customer keep his dignity when he could not afford much. Chair 40 stayed beside the window, and Walter refused to turn a working barber chair into a museum piece. On ordinary Tuesdays, beginners learned their first clean cuts in it. Only on August 28th, the anniversary of Abel's passing, did it remain empty. That morning, 39 bikers arrived before sunrise and placed their appointment cards beneath the brass plate. 8 sat in folding chairs. The others stood in the open engine bay and along the apron while Walter opened the classroom. The old shop was gone. Walter was not. His hands still shook some mornings, but they no longer shook when someone placed a contract in front of him. At 5:40 a.m., he switched on the lights, lifted his scissors, and welcomed the first student preparing for a job interview. Behind him, Chair 40 turned toward the mirror, ready for the student who needed a new beginning. Beneath its footrest, the brass number kept Abel's place, and the promise still held all 40 men. If you believe in the true brotherhood and kindness of bikers, please hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel for more stories. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.